Hey, what's up, guys? Node Investor here. Look at that big green candle. It's about time we finally get that breakout. We've been watching this action for quite some time. Finally saw it happen last night. Luckily, I was awake for it. Was about to call it a night, go to sleep, and I said, I'm going to take a look at the charts. At the time, it was literally like 30 minutes before Bitcoin did anything. Hadn't started pumping, and then I just started seeing it real time. It was a glorious rocket ship move, up 20+% very quickly in the span of an hour. Everything was moving very quickly. Ultra getting smashed as Bitcoin was rallying. And for those of you that caught that live, I know on the Slack group, all the messages started to flow pretty quick. It was pretty wild. Binance was freezing up. Coinbase was freezing up. Things were just moving slow as the volume was really kicking in across the board. And so we're going to take a look at the charts. I'm going to look at some news items, which are kind of funny. There's always going to be a lot of explanations. Why did this happen? What was going on? I'll share my thoughts around it and share some interesting news items. And then we'll kind of explore, where do we go from here? There's a couple of good questions that we have to ask. And of course, it's anyone's guess, but things to keep in mind. Now that we've seen the breakout, now that prices have crossed over that 4,200 threshold, we saw 5,000 yesterday. I thought about doing a 5K live stream, but it was kind of late in my day, so I decided not to. But, we saw 5K. And so the big question is, where do we go from here? And so before we get into all of that, let's look at the coin market cap and just very quickly cycle through some of the other items here. Looking at the overall coin market cap here, I'm going to blow up the 1 year chart. I mean, you got to keep in mind, we're still off, well off the big picture highs. Is it the low though? That's one of the key questions, right? We saw the coin market cap drop down to $100 billion here in mid-December. The pain was real across the board, especially since we had that big break sub 6K Bitcoin, which quickly took the coin market cap from 200 billion down to 100 billion, basically erasing, 80, 90 billion dollars in a number of weeks. And, there was a lot of capitulation down here, a lot of pain being felt, and that turned out to be a pretty good low in mid-December. We've since seen some pretty good rallies across the board, and here now we are back up to that 160, $170 billion mark, and we've got a long ways to go before we go anywhere near the old highs, but it's nice to see that we're bouncing. And the big question is this the low? Are we going to look back retrospectively and say that was it in December? That big spike lower was the washout? Or will it turn out to be this is just another bounce along the way? Maybe it stalls out around that 200 billion and then we retest the lows. That's yet to be seen. But looking at the coin market cap and the BTC dominance here, you can see the Bitcoin dominance had been drifting lower here over the last few months. The altcoin rallies have been very nice here versus BTC. And then yesterday we saw a little tick higher as Bitcoin shot very quickly at the gate. Most alts were not able to keep up. We'll see that here as we look at the charts. But generally, kind of around that 50% mark, and you can see the other category has been marching higher, which is nice. Small cap, mid cap names have been rallying off the floors and looking pretty good. And one thing to note here, so Bitcoin jumps 20%. One of the explanations is there's this mysterious whale that did a coordinated buy across 3 exchanges, buying 20,000 BTC, and it was just one of those explanations. It certainly looked that way. If you look at the volume patterns, it was just kind of out of nowhere, that big spike, but it also happened to correspond with that breakout over 4,200, which a lot of people were watching. Another one here is, this is silly. You look at Bloomberg. April Fool's joke may have been the trigger for the cryptocurrency rally. Bloomberg knows that wasn't the case. Everyone knows that wasn't the case, and yet they still put that stupid clickbait title there. But they were explaining some of the reasons why, some of the surge. No, the Asian market was not tricked into buying Bitcoin because they thought the SEC had approved an ETF. That news, that kind of joke came out, 15, 20 hours earlier, and so that certainly was not the reason, but certainly the big push did happen late in the evening during the Asian hours. It was about 9:30, 9:45 my time, PM, when things started to really get moving. But it's just interesting to see all the headlines out there, the mainstream media, really talking about this huge surge in BTC, which it was. I mean, let's go look at the charts here and what an amazing move it was. And just to kind of set some context here, I'll come back to that here shortly. I want to point something out here. I mean, we've been looking at 6 green weeks in a row, now week 7 in a row. And if you factor this red one here, I mean, it's been pretty much straight up since early February. And one thing to point out, I mean, just look at the magnitude of the candle, the spike that we saw in 1 hour's time yesterday. If you look at the entire move from that February low over the prior 8 weeks, 7 weeks, that was basically a 24% move over that entire span of time, basically 2 months worth of price action. And we got all of that in 1 hour yesterday during that crazy pump. I mean, these are the type of moves that as crypto traders you live for, right? You just love to see that. It was nice to see it real time, but just really puts things into perspective, because I mean, it literally doubled the entire move that it had done in the prior 2 months. So it just really goes to show you how massive of a move that was. On the upside, it was probably the biggest percentage gain move that we had seen on a daily basis, going back to my guess is probably right back here when we had the massive spike down in February, quick spike higher. I mean, that was a huge bounce off the lows, 30-40% in no time. That's probably the last time we saw anything of that big. We had a pretty good one, if you guys remember, last April off the lows. That was about 16% in a day. But yesterday's move probably tops those all. Last time we've been seeing this type of action was way back, probably talking 2017 when you start looking at these kind of moves. So it's been a big move up. Of course, on the way down, there's been similar moves of that magnitude on the way down here, and we've become all too familiar with those. So it's nice to finally get some bullish action, some green, killing the shorts, breaking out, moving up, just very good across the board, very nice. And so, I mean, there's a lot of explanations, the news, the rumors, a whale buying it, but let's be real. This was the perfect storm. It was in the making. It has been in play for several months now. We've all been watching this breakout attempt. Prices have been moving higher, and I've been talking about the trend is your friend. I mean, every time it dips down, it's being bought up. It's making higher lows, higher highs. And, you know, I was basically sitting patient through this entire chop, and it wasn't easy, but it was mostly just chop, taking alt trades, holding BTC, and I had been buying new BTC back here in November and in December when things really started to get here near the lows, and have just been accumulating Bitcoin. That was really my goal. I thought, even if that's not the low, it's a very good low for me. I'm willing to ride this out, and has been moving higher. Very nice move off the lows since the December low. At the peak yesterday, the price of Bitcoin had rallied off the lows basically 60+%. A very good move, very nice to see that. And one thing I want to make note now is the RSI on the daily is certainly starting to get up there again. I did a live stream for the Node Insiders yesterday, and at the time the daily RSI was still sub 70, and I mentioned that when things start to spike, something I look into as a potential place or a little bit of a time frame to start scaling out of. I was talking about this as maybe a breakout spike. Now, I personally didn't expect it to spike that high. I was thinking, hey, we're going to probably break out. First target's going to be, 4,400, 4,500. Start looking for that area to be resistance. Maybe start selling to that. And it just kept going yesterday. So I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. I didn't get to the 5,000 fill, unfortunately. I was pretty much scaling out along the way. I think I got my last sell probably in the mid 4,800s and in around here. But hey, it was still a nice move across the board. The alts certainly did get smashed. We'll look at some of these here, but a lot of them have recovered nicely. And so I'm keeping an eye on some of these alts on the way up to see how they start performing, if BTC can hold up. But let's finish the BTC story here before we go to some of those alts. So just make note of that. The RSI here on the daily is certainly very extended from the moving averages now. I mean, it was just a massive spike way off the lows. It's the type of breakout move that you expect out of a big base like this. I mean, look at the massive volume. I mean, just smashed right through all resistance levels. And so all in all, very nice action. I think it needs to be digested a little bit. Doesn't mean it's going to come all the way back down to 4,200, but it needs to pause, take a breather, maybe put in a little bit of a bull flag, something along those lines. That'd be very positive. Let things kind of cool off and then set up another leg higher. If things continue higher, the next big resistance level for BTC is essentially this small pause consolidation we had on the way down in November, and that's that 5,400 to 5,600 level. If it continues higher, if we get a break, a pause, and then another rally higher, that's going to be a big level to be watching here on the way up. And then of course, the massive level, big psychological level, is that break point that really broke down here in November, that 6K level that was support for so long that broke down. Now, many of the alts have already fully retraced up to that point in November. Some of them have already broken up above that, but Bitcoin, as we know, had kind of been lagging a little bit, still strong. I mean, up 30% at the time and now up 60% from the lows, but still nowhere near that break point in November. So that's going to be the next two levels to be watching on the upside. On the downside, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to kind of highlight some key levels here. On the downside, this little $4,600 level has been established near term as your first support level, and then on the upside, basically around 48.40, 48.50. That's your near-term resistance. And if we zoom in here, I'm going to go to the 5-minute chart, very short-term time frame, but you can see here very clearly just has been range bound within these two levels. Above 48.40, then you're looking at around basically that 5K mark, psychological number, a retest of that potentially. On the way down, if it breaks below 46.60, then what I'm going to be looking for is on the daily chart a touch back at one of the moving averages, let things catch up here, and it's kind of anyone's guess. It's going to be no man's land now because things moved up so quickly, and so you have to really kind of just zoom into the 5-minute chart and take a look at some of those levels on the way up, and there weren't very many. Let me zoom in here on this spike higher for us, and there weren't very many on the way up. Really the only pause that we had here was this brief pause for about 20 minutes right around that $4,700 level, and then you got that one last spike before things really pulled back and have just kind of been chopping around since then. And so that's really, you know, your last support level, not a lot on the way down. So one thing I'd be watching is maybe the shorter term moving averages on the 1-hour charts. If you look at the 22 EMA on the 1 hour, it's down here around 46.40, and really that's just below that 4,600 level that I'm watching. So just some things to make note of there. I have scaled out, taken some profits into that move yesterday, and then buying back in dips, and just now it's a little bit more active trading for me, right? I was certainly just being patient here and holding through a lot of this chop over the last couple of months. Now that we've had this amazing move off the lows, I'm okay leaving a little bit off the table, right? Leaving some at the top, not getting the exact number, just because I think it needs to be digested now. So I'm going to be focused more on the alts, but not so much holding BTC value as much as just kind of trading the total account value up and maintaining a minimum amount there and protecting the downside exposure. And so that's really going to be my new focus, kind of heading forward until this thing settles out, and then we'll go from there. So where do we go from here? The big question that really remains, and of course is impossible to answer at this point, we won't know for sure until later, but the big question is, was this low in December the low? Was that the ultimate low at the end of the bear market that started here in January of 2018, culminating in this big spike washout low, ultimately finding support at $3,100? Or is this just a little bit of a bounce in this broader bear market that's still in play? A couple of things that I want to point out here, things that I'll be watching to help answer this question as time progresses, as we start to see the price action here over the next couple of months, is really there's key support and resistance levels you got to keep an eye on, but there's also these moving averages. Now, I don't use the moving average crossover system in terms of my trading. It tends to lag a little bit, but it's kind of an interesting way to look at things from a confirmation level in the big picture. So what we're looking at here is the weekly chart. This is on Bitstamp to get more history, and the two lines on the chart here are the 10 EMA and the 22 EMA, and again this is on the weekly chart. And you can see here on the 10 EMA we still see the prices of course above both moving averages now, but the 10 EMA is still below the 22 EMA. Now the good news is they're starting to turn the corner, they're flattening out, and the 10 is finally starting to curl higher, as is the 22 now that we've seen this big run higher. Confirmation will be when the 10 starts to cross above that 22, and then price starts to hold above that. And of course, you can have these occasional dips and all that. These moving averages will eventually start to go flat, vacillate a little bit around each other, but then eventually the 10 EMA will start to trend higher and stay above the 22 EMA. That by definition is a longer term trend, longer term uptrend, and that's what we want to see, right? When you start to see this moving average starting to go higher, that means that the price is starting to push and pull that one up, and it's staying above the longer term moving average. And we haven't seen a crossover. The last time we saw a crossover was to the downside here when prices crossed over here in March, and of course prices had already been in a downtrend since then. So that's why I say it's a lagging indicator, certainly not something I use to make my trading decisions per se, but it's an interesting indicator to use for confirmation. We can see what happened next. There was that spike lower, prices pushed higher. Yes, prices did get above the moving averages temporarily, but then they rolled right over, and the moving averages just never crossed back above each other. They were trending lower. They were inverted for the rest of 2018, of course, even now, but they're starting to turn higher finally. If we look at some history and compare that to what we've seen here in the past, the last time we had a positive moving average crossover was back here in October of 2015, a long time ago. And that was the last time, that was the end of the last bear market. And we had this crossover, and of course prices went higher, they pulled back, and they just started to hold. But look at what happened though. The moving averages started to trend upward. The 10 EMA remained above the 22 for the duration of the rest of that bull market, which lasted another couple of years, of course, ultimately topping here in January of 2018. If we look at the bear market that led to that last crossover, there was a couple of false attempts here, so something I want to make note of, right? So we look at the bear market here. This was August of 2014. You had that crossover. Prices remained below both moving averages for the most part. Then you started to see some chop. Moving averages started to curl higher, and you had this crossover attempt here, that first one. This was really the first kind of signal that said maybe, just maybe, that spike we saw back there a few months was the low. And look at the duration that it took, right? This was January when it made its ultimate price low. Then price rallied, kind of just chopped around for a few months. And the first time price got back above both moving averages on a closing basis was in June, right? 6 months later. And they continued higher for a couple weeks before seeing several weeks of down and ultimately undercutting these lows before marking the bottom. And then from there, it was just kind of off to the races, the start of a new bull market. And so that's going to be something to be watching here. Again, not a perfect system, a good way to just kind of check and confirm what you're potentially seeing in the price action. I always use price action first. I look at volume patterns, a bunch of other things, but this is kind of a nice little double check that I'll use. And so that's what I'm going to be watching for here as we go forward, is that December low. Was that the low? Now we're seeing prices push above moving averages curl higher. If we see a pullback, how quickly can it recover from there? And then do we start to see another rally higher, which ultimately leads to a new longer term bull market? That's what we all want to see. And I do believe we'll get that again. Is it now? Is this it? Hey, it could be. Something to be watching here. What do you guys think? Let me know. Is this the end of the bear? Did we see the low? Or is this just a little bit of a bounce and maybe we're going to retrace and make a new lower low? I'm not sure how many people are still in the BTC 1200 camp, but who knows? I'm sure if prices turn bearish again, they'll start coming out of the woodwork as they usually do. So we'll see how this goes, but all in all, things are looking positive. Things are looking good. Just trade safe, stay disciplined, try not to FOMO. Either way, it's been a pretty good market the last couple of weeks. The Q1 was tremendous and not easy, to say the least. A lot of chop, a lot of whipsaws, a lot of back and forth. Absolutely has been a battle here in the zone, but things are looking positive here in the near term. So all in all, very good action. We'll see how this goes over the next few weeks, but of course, I will keep you guys posted as always. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.